Okay, so thank you everyone for joining. I'll make a start. My name is Sahil Aslan from Elysium, and I look after the ILMT practice here. So on behalf of everyone at Elysium, welcome to our first in a series of webinars on IBM License Metric Tool and licensing. So what I'd like to do today is just give you an overview of the license metric tool and some of the pitfalls in actually getting the product installed as well. Each of those subjects you can actually go into far more in depth, but time only allows us to kind of look at it at a very high level. And obviously, should you have any questions, or if you'd like to have a more in detail depth presentation on any particular aspect of the license metric tool, then feel free to drop us a note and we'll get that arranged also. So in terms of the agenda, I'll first cover the licensing models that IBM has that require IBM License Metric Tool, the requirements that you've signed up to in your Passport Advantage agreement, what is ILMT, some of the planning aspects, the deployment of ILMT, and also some of the features, in particular some of the new features of ILMT, and also, more importantly, some of the ongoing tasks that you do have to complete even once you've got it installed and configured. And then at the end, we'll have a question and answer session. If you do have any really burning questions while I'm talking, then please go ahead. But in the meantime, if I could ask everyone put their phones on mute. Thank you. So IBM License Metric Tool, it's really used, or essentially used, to track PVU. PVU is a processor value unit, and the way IBM works out how many PVUs there are per core depends on the processor vendor, the brand, the type, the model, and also the number of processors. And that's the majority of IBM licensing. There are other licensing metrics as well, but ILMT was predominantly designed to measure PVU usage in your environment. Now, there's two scenarios. When it comes to PVU-based licensing. There's full capacity, which is where, in this particular example, if you've got a server that has 16 physical processor cores, and you have software A, B, and C, your requirements would be to license all 16 cores for each individual product. So that's full capacity. Subcapacity is where if you've installed software A and software C, for example, on individual VMs, then what you can do is only pay for the cores used by each individual software product. So in the previous case, you'd have to license software A, B, and C for 16 cores. In subcapacity terms, you would only license for 10 cores for software A, 10 cores for software B, and 14 cores for software C. And there can be significant savings using the subcapacity model, which is widely used by the majority of IBM customers. When you use subcapacity licensing, there's no separate agreement anymore, so you don't have to sign up a separate agreement. It's part of the standard Passport Advantage agreement that you've already signed up for, but there's a couple of things that you do have to do. So as soon as you internally start using subcapacity licensing, within 90 days you have to deploy IBM License Metric Tool. It has to be deployed within 90 days, otherwise you've contravened your agreements with IBM. You also have a duty to actually install the most current version of ILMT as per your agreement. Now, this is one of the drivers for having this first session, is the current version, which is, the old version, which is 7.5, which is in use by the majority of our customers, goes out of support in April. So the new version is 9.2, and that's what we're going to really cover today. The other thing that you do have to do is you have to ensure that your IBM audit reports are generated once per quarter. It's good practice to actually have these reports generated on a monthly basis, but at least every 90 days you have to take a snapshot, and you have to ensure that these snapshots are actually saved off should the auditors require them. You don't actually need to sign the reports anymore as you did in version 7.5. The other thing that you have to do is the reports have to be available for at least 2 years. So don't, if for some reason your server was to be go down and it's no longer available, you have to make sure that the data is actually backed up as well. So make sure that you back up the data so that you've always got at least 2 years worth of data. Now there's a couple of exceptions to this, to not use ILMT. So for example, if ILMT doesn't support your operating system or your virtualized environment, then you don't have to deploy ILMT on those servers. But what you have to do in that scenario is keep a manual record of your usage, and there's a standard spreadsheet. If anybody's not aware of what that is and you are using some type of manual calculations on some of your servers, then please ask and we can get that sent out to you as well. The other exception is if you have fewer than 1,000 employees and contractors, and a service provider is not contracted to actually manage your environment. So if you're using a service provider, and even if you've got fewer than 1,000 employees, you still have to, it's mandatory to still use ILMT. And then the last one is really if your total processing capacity of your the software that you've installed is less than 1,000 PVs, which is, I would say, virtually extremely rare, then you also don't have to use it. And then lastly, if you're not using sub-capacity and you're only using full capacity, you're licensing all the cores in your servers, then there's no need to do it. In terms of best practice, if you do have if you do go ahead and install ILMT and you're using sub-capacity, what we always advise is for customers to do the sub-capacity servers first, but then also if you have some physical servers, bring those in. It really allows you a single point where you can actually view your license usage as opposed to just sub-capacity. So a bit about ILMT and what the benefits are. It's not just for IBM's benefit. Yes, they mandate it and you have to do it, but we also see a usage or an advantage for the customer, because you yourself can then actually track the uses of software in your environment. So if you've got many servers, sometimes we see people tracking these using spreadsheets and various other mechanisms, but if you've actually got the ILMT installed, you can actually see very easy exactly how many PVUs you're using, which software components are being used, what's installed. And for software asset managers, it's a dream, because you don't have to then rely on somebody else providing you reports. You can access the reports, and when it comes up for renewal or additional purchases, then you'll have that automatically recorded. I mean, quite often we've been in scenarios where customers have installed on, say, 15 to 20 servers over the space of 2 or 3 years. Some of those servers have been decommissioned, but no one's actually told the SAM people that this particular software is no longer being used on those servers. So because ILMT agent or the BigFix agent will be removed, it will be no longer showing in ILMT. So from one central place for yourselves, you can actually track that usage. So it's not just for ILMT, for IBM, it's also great usage for yourselves as well. So the general expectations of an ILMT deployment, and this is where we see many customers fall foul. The general expectation is that ILMT is a plug-and-play tool. It's not. It is really a project. It's something that you have to keep on top of, and you do have to invest some time. You have to have good procedures around ensuring that it's installed, and there is some work for the customer to do as well. You have to ensure that what's been discovered is correct and it's configured correctly. The second thing that we see is that the expectation is that all the licensing rules are already in the product. That really is not the case at all, and I'll give you an example. DB2 can be licensed standalone, and it also comes free with multiple products that are sold by IBM. There is also different versions of, say, for example, DB2 that are licensed with different versions of other IBM products. So those licensing rules are found in IBM's license information documents for every single product. That's something that's available on the web. But these rules are not in ILMT. So you have to go in and make sure that you're using the right versions. We've seen customers that have installed, say, product A. It comes with DB2 10.5, but they go and install version 11.1. That's contravening rules. Again, this is another reason where as a customer you get control and you get to visualize what is installed in reality. So we're talking about ILMT version 9.2 or version 9. There's really three very important steps. The first one is the planning, and making sure that you've got the right hardware configuration. Is a different configuration to what you would have seen previously. Making sure that all the OS configuration prereqs are met, whether you go down the Windows route or the Linux route. And more importantly, and last of all, where most customers fall foul, is the network configuration. If you get these three planning steps done, then the next step, which is actually doing the installation on Red Hat Linux or Windows, it's a much smoother process. But the key thing is to really focus. You can end up spending say 2 days doing the planning, getting all that organized, and then the actual physical installation of the server can be done in a matter of hours to a day. But the planning piece is where a lot of your time is actually spent. And the last piece, which is configuration, which is software classification, I'll talk about that towards the end as well, but that is where we see most customers fall foul. They'll do the installation, they'll get the server installed, they will get the agents out there, and it will come back with discovered data. But software classification, to me, is where most of the time is spent of any implementation, and the bit that always gets forgotten. Software classification is making sure that what's being discovered is allocated to the right product. And what I mean by that is IBM will sell you a product. You have a product that you've purchased and that you own, but that could come with several components that get discovered. And I gave the example of DB2 before. It's making sure that it's configured correctly, and that is where the majority of failures and incorrect and inaccurate reports are. But if this step is actually part of the initial project, then it will definitely help you making sure that the reports are correct. So before I get into some of the steps, here's a reference slide. There's three things on there: the planning part and preparing for the installation. So there's a link there for you. And if you want to go and install the components separately, so I'll go into that when I talk about the architecture. But there are several individual components that need to be installed. And then the last link there is using the all-in-one installer, where all the components for ILMT installed using a single installer. And that's only available on Linux, by the way. It's not available on Windows. So let's take a quick look at the architecture. It is different to what you would have been familiar with 7.5. And the biggest change there, if you can see the slide there, is the BigFix server and the BigFix clients. So now with ILMT version 9, the actual infrastructure and the agent technology is using BigFix, which is IBM's commercial software that it sells to manage servers and desktops, providing not just inventory, but also security scanning, updates of patches, and so on. So that was the biggest change between the old version and the new version, that it's using IBM's commercial software to provide the underlying technology. And then ILMT is the application that just accesses the data that's been discovered. In terms of where you can install it, you've got an option, only got 2 options, whereas previously you had many options to install on many different operating systems, but now there's only 2 options available. It's Red Hat Linux or Windows. With Red Hat Linux, you get to use DB2, and that comes with the product. And with Windows, you have to use Microsoft SQL Server, either Enterprise Standard. And if you've got a small deployment of up to 500 agents, then you can use Microsoft SQL Express as well. So the diagram there shows essentially just one server, and that's really more than enough for up to 500 agents. If you've got more than 500 agents or 500 servers that need to be monitored, then you can actually split out all the different components. Now, I'm not really going to get into that today in terms of installation, but again, it's all possible, but it's something that I'm not going to focus on today. So the planning piece. I think this chart really shows you the various touch points that the new version has from a network perspective. It looks more complicated than it is, but essentially port 52311 is the main port that needs to be open between the server and the agents, and that really takes care of all the agent to server communications. There is a BigFix console and an ILMT console. ILMT uses HTTPS, which is internally it's normally fine. BigFix consoles use 52311. So essentially it's one port to use BigFix internally. The other touch points are, and this is quite important as well, the way ILMT version 9 works now is that it uses BigFix technology, which has a term called fixlets. Those fixlets and those updates are automatically downloaded from the internet. So the server does need to have access to the internet to those BigFix servers as well. There's about 5 or 6 servers that you need to generally open up ports to allow communications. So like I said, it looks complicated, but it isn't really. The main thing to remember is port 52311 is the port that's used, and it is bidirectional as well, because it uses TCP and UDP as well. The last thing on the slide there is a connection to vCenter, and that essentially allows you to get the underlying hardware information, but it's a configuration step after the install. I've put vCenter there, but there are other hypervisors like Microsoft Hyper-V that are also supported that you need to set up a connection to. But in this diagram, we've just got vCenter. So in terms of planning, again, like I said, if you get the planning piece correct and you thought through everything, then it will go very, very smoothly. The underlying hardware that's needed is 4 cores, 8 gigabytes of RAM, and 60 GB. Now, if you've got a small number of endpoints, let's say 20 to 30, then although IBM says that the minimum is 4, I've seen it work with 2 cores as well. Now, what that does do is it will actually, if you only have 2 cores to start with, it will actually slow the implementation or the installation down. It will go far smoother and quicker with 4 cores and 8 GB of RAM. I'll mention the various ports that are used. 52311, and then to get to the ILMT server, it's a configurable port, normally 9081. Again, that's all internally. And I think the last thing to remember is to make sure, if you're using ESX server, to make sure you get the credentials from whoever looks after your ESX environment to get the credentials. And what you essentially need is read access, and it's something that's worth asking for up front. All you essentially need is the user ID, the password, and the host name, and it's all read access, and it's something that's very, very easy for these guys to do. So that's common. From a Linux perspective, there are actually a whole host of libraries that need to be installed on your Red Hat Linux server up front. If you don't install these, then the install will fail. In some situations, it will flag up an error and say, I need certain libraries. In other scenarios I've seen where the install just hangs. But we've got all those documented. If you get those installed on your Linux server up front, you won't have any issues. You can't use sudo, so you will need to su to root. And to actually do the install, then we recommend either using PuTTY or MOBA Xterm for access. Xminge is not supported. So what we're recommending here is to actually do an interactive install as opposed to a silent install. So you can do a silent install where you can create a configuration file and kick that off on Unix. The issue I have with that is if there are any failures, then you won't be able to restart from the beginning. Whereas if you use the interactive install, you can actually restart the installation. As soon as you run setup, it will carry on from the step where it failed. So if it fails, if it installs DB2 and there's an issue installing BigFix, it will just restart from wherever it left. On the right-hand side of the slide deck, you can see the various versions of Windows that are supported for a server perspective. And at the bottom, I've got some of the features like desktop experience and .NET 3.5.1 that are needed. So you need to make sure that those features are installed before you actually start any installations whatsoever. So in terms of the various steps that you go through, if you're using the all-in-one Linux installer, check to make sure the hardware prereqs are in place. Download the package, and the version that I've got down there is 9.25. That's the all-in-one installer, so that's the part number that you can search on in Passport Advantage and actually download. Once you download it, you start the installer, and the installer in the background individually installs DB2. It will install BigFix, and then it will automatically install the ILMT application as well. Once that's finished, there is it pops up a screen and asks you to configure the database connections and perform an import. The import is essentially loading the new software catalog, the PVU, the products, and so on. So that's the all-in-one installer. It really does run through fairly quickly, and like, as I said, you can get this done if you've got all the prereqs in place and you've planned it properly. Then comfortably in a half a day you can get that installed. For Windows, it's a little bit different. You have to actually install each of the components separately. I've put BigFix server there for, and I've got the part number for version 9.5. You actually install, the first thing is to actually install SQL Server Express. If you're not using standard Enterprise Edition, install SQL Server first, then install BigFix, and that's your part number there. Once you've got BigFix installed, you have to go to this website and download what's called an authorization file. With the all-in-one installer, all of these steps are actually done in the background, but when you're using Windows, you have to do this manual step. So there's a file there that you have to download. If you click on that link, you put in your name, organization name, and your email address, and then it will send you an email and also allow you to download the authorization file. That authorization file is actually used as input to the installer. Once you've downloaded the file, you will install SQL Server, install BigFix, and BigFix will reference that file. Once it's installed, there's a few more manual steps. And again, these are, if you follow those documentation steps or the references that I put in previously, it actually goes through this. So whereas the all-in-one installer on Linux actually does all of these steps in the background, you do have to go into the BigFix console, you log on, you accept the license agreement, and then you actually download ILMT. So prior to this, step 3 is all you've got is SQL Server installed, BigFix installed. You haven't actually installed ILMT. You have to go in, accept the license, and then it will actually download. Then you have to download ILMT from the console and do the install. So there's a few more manual steps, but again, if you've planned it properly, then you really won't have an issue with the install. So a couple of hints and tips. I would suggest that you get your vCenter. Again, I'm talking about vCenter. The same applies for other hypervisors as well. Make sure that you configure the connection as soon as it's installed, so it can gather the underlying hardware information. Bear in mind that the template, when you go in and configure for vCenter, there are different links for vCenter 5 and above. So the template may be wrong. So just make sure that you know which version of vCenter that you're using to manage your ESX farm, and enter the correct link. One of the things that we found almost every single time with the all-in-one installer is that it always fails connecting to the FixLit servers. So do you remember in the network diagram, it goes out to IBM FixLit servers and downloads the FixLits. Now, it's not the fact that it actually fails when it's connecting. What it fails with is that when it's downloading that data, it's taking long. It's not a huge amount of data, but for some reason, it times out. But the good thing with the all-in-one installer is it will say it's failed at a step, and it gives you an option to actually hit the restart button. You hit retry, and almost every single time we've done this, the second time it will always work. And also, obviously, with Linux, carefully check your disk space requirements. There is some, it does install DB2 in the user's home directory or for the DB2 user ID, so we just need to make sure that when you partition your disk, it's done correctly. For Windows, what we found always works very well is to use, if you're installing SQL Server, use Windows Authentication Mode. Always use the default instance name for SQL Server, and that's an option when you're doing the install, and the reason for that is you don't have to have browser install SQL Browser. After SQL Server's been installed, you do have to go in and configure SQL Server to use the TCP/IP protocol. So when you download SQL Server, download the tools with it, and there's an admin tool that allows you to configure TCP/IP. So make sure you configure that before you actually install BigFix. Some tips for agent installations. I would say probably 99% of the errors that we see are down to network connectivity, where the agent's been installed, you can't see it on the BigFix console, but what you can do is a couple of things to actually check to see whether the agent has no connectivity issues from the server back to the ILMT or BigFix server. So you can do that on Linux. Just issue a curl command, HTTPS, and go to your server name, put the port in, and /rd. What that will give you, it will give you, if the connection, if there's no network issues between the agent and the server, then it should come back and give you a page of some detail. And again, also, I'll put a reference in there for where the logs are kept, so you can always check the agent log to see if there's anything else in there. But as I said, 99% of the time, it is nearly always some type of network connectivity issue, maybe a router blocking something, the port. So those are the steps to check that. On Windows, it's a lot easier. You can just go into a browser and put the server name in, port /rd, and again, you can check to make sure it will come back with a page of some data. And again, I'll put the reference in there for the logs as well on Windows. But every time, it's always down to a network connectivity issue between the agent and the server. So this is what the new ILMT console looks like. This is the main page, and it gives you a quick overview of the deployment and the agents, whether scanning's working, not working, how many are left to scan, whether the capacity data, which is the hardware or the core information, has been detected. And then on the bottom left, you've got a quick overview of the products that's discovered and the PUEs being used. The next panel is the software classification, and again, it shows you how many confirmed classifications and unconfirmed classifications. So what essentially ILMT does when it does a software scan is it will go away, discover components, individual components, and then you have to go in and confirm that the product that it's assigned to is actually correct. So this is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about classification. So what you can see there is a component's been discovered. It's IBM Cloud Manager with OpenStack, and it's ILMT has actually assigned that to a product called Open Manager with OpenStack for Power. At this stage, you have to go and either confirm that the instance is correct, or you have to assign it to another product. So again, I'll use the example of DB2. If it discovers DB2 and you've got multiple IBM products, then you have to make sure that you assign it to the correct one. And I know I've only got one slide, but this is a key process that you do have to go through to make sure that you assign it to the correct, you assign the component that's been discovered to the correct product. It's not unusual also at this stage to discover components that you didn't know were installed. But I've never been through an ILMT implementation where things have been found that weren't there. And again, there's lots and lots of reasons for those. But you do have to go in and actually check everything that's been discovered. There's also mechanisms for say, for example, excluding products that are discovered from the licensing calculation, and there has to be a valid reason. And when you actually select exclude instances, you do have to put a reason. And some of the reasons could be that it's a backup copy, it's installed, the product's installed, but it's not running. So you do have to go in and put a note if you do actually exclude it, but it's something that you can do. And you can also very easily see which part numbers the product belongs to as well, that it's allocated it against as well. So this is IBM software classification, and it is probably the most time-consuming part of any implementation. I say it's time-consuming, but the majority of customers that we've worked with, this part can take anything between 3 and 8 days of work. But once you've done that piece of work, it's going to give you accurate reports that you can be comfortable with. One of the other new features in ILMT version 9 is an audit trail. So you can actually very, very quickly go back and see, if a new PVU table was installed, if somebody allocated a product, whether there's any import failures, uploads of data. Again, it's a complete audit trail of everything that's being done in ILMT console. So once you've got ILMT installed, you've done your classification, you're happy with the reports, there are some things that you do need to actually do on an ongoing basis. IBM updates the PVU tables. It does really vary, but it can be almost as often as every quarter. So as new hardware is released by various web vendors, the PVU tables, or even if there's new CPUs that are available, IBM will release a new PVU table that you do have to update, and the link there actually takes you to whatever the latest PVU table is. The next thing you have to do is you also have to update the software catalog, and this is normally released somewhere before the middle of the month. It can be, it's normally the first half of every month that a new software catalog is actually released by IBM. If you don't do this, it can be held against you if you get audited for not updating the catalog. So even though the reports are running, if you've not updated to the latest software catalog, the software catalog essentially contains all the signatures for IBM products. And you do have to do this on every month without fail. If you don't, it could very well be held against you during any type of audit. And the last thing that you'd want to do is actually set up monthly reports. Again, you don't have to do this monthly. It's required every quarter. But with the new version, you can set up timers to actually automatically produce those reports and actually email those to you as well. And the last step there is to actually take this is today still a manual process. You have to go into product and take a manual snapshot and actually save the data for any potential audits. So a couple of differences, more differences with ILMT version 9 compared to the old one. The old one really focused on PVU capacity reports. Now, again, this is not required. However, what it can do is it can also now report on other usage as well. So there's various metrics out there for IBM products, such as user-based licensing. As IBM releases new versions of any product, one of the things that it has to do now is produce usage reports. So if, for example, IBM Domino is released and it's based on the number of users, then the new version will have internally a mechanism where it will create a software tag file that's consumable by ILMT. ILMT will pick that up and it will actually say how many users are actually using any particular product. So as new products are released by IBM, new versions, they will all have ID files that are consumable by ILMT. Yes, there is no mandatory requirement, but I would say if you can get all your licensing in one place, then why wouldn't you? That wouldn't be the focus for the initial implementation, but it's something that you could take on. You couldn't you couldn't create reports for just a product. It's now you have some filtering capabilities to produce a whole set of reports based on products, on computers. It really is very, very extensive. Previously, you had to sign the reports. You don't need to sign those anymore, but you do have to take audit snapshots every 90 days. Once the historical data was gone and once it was signed, you could no longer access it, whereas now the historical data is accessible and can also be recalculated. And what I mean by that is if you if it's discovered a product, you suddenly realize it was classified as the wrong one, as soon as you fix it, it will go back in time and actually fix that for you as well. So it's far more flexible, much more easier to use, and also extremely reliable. So for those of you that are also planning on deploying in public clouds, ILMT also now supports the use of public clouds. So previously, the only way ILMT could access the number of cores that were being used and the underlying hardware is by having a connection to your hypervisor. In the public cloud, you'll never get that access. So this has actually, in the past, hindered deployment of IBM software into the cloud, but now ILMT now supports it. You can actually deploy to supported clouds, IBM, Microsoft, Amazon. Those are the ones that are supported at the moment. So if you want to deploy software out there, then you can do, and ILMT can also manage that as well. There are some steps that you have to do. You have to go in and say, and in this example, we're configuring a server that's out there in Microsoft Azure. So you do have to tell it which public cloud that server is actually on, and then it will automatically convert that to a PVU value per core. And then I also talked about in the new version, it can actually support various license type. In this screenshot, you can see client devices being detected, authorized users, concurrent users as well, and this list of what IBM has will grow, and it grows every single month as new software is being released. What you can also see is that the trend of usage as well, and how its trends are. All of a sudden, if a trend is going upwards, then you know that at some point you're going to need some more license, or if it's going the other way, you can look at reducing the licenses that you renew. So that's really all I wanted to cover. As I said, we can hold more sessions and go into individual aspects of installation on Linux or on Windows, or some of the SAM functions that you also need to produce, but that there will be separate sessions and far more in depth. So at this point, I'd like to open up if anybody's got any questions.
Do you want questions in writing?
Any questions from anyone? I can hear somebody coming off mute, but I can't hear any questions. Okay, so the first question is the report shows something about virtualized devices. Let me just go back to the screenshot 1 second. Was it this screenshot? So IBM has various metrics that it licenses products on. And one of those could be a virtualized device, and that's just another metric that it can actually monitor. So it's just another metric that can be monitored. So the next question, do you know how this would impact the new VPC licensing model that IBM introduced late last year? I'm not familiar with the new VPC model, so what we can do is after this call, actually do some research, and I'll come back to you with an answer on that. Got some more questions coming in that I'm just reading. Yes, okay, so another question about VM managers and how to actually go away and do this. So I'll use the example of if you're using ESX from VMware, and essentially what you have to do is you have to have a couple of key bits of information. The first is you need a user ID and a password that has access to vCenter. That's the first thing, user ID and password. It needs read access to vCenter. And vCenter, and the reason why we recommend vCenter is because from vCenter it will then, if you've got multiple ESX servers, it will have access to those. So you gather your, you get your user ID, password, and the host name. Then within the ILMT console, I don't have a screenshot of it, but there is a configure VM button. And in there you'll put your credentials, the host name, and like I said, depending on which version of vCenter you're using, there's a URL that you type in there. It literally takes a couple of minutes if you have that information. Again, if we've got your email address, then what we can do is also take some screenshots and actually show you how to actually do that. But you do need to do that, because without doing that, it will never know what the underlying hardware actually is. So the next question, how long does it take for any agent to show up in the ILMT console once the BES agent is installed on a VM? Okay, so by default, so yes, you're right, in the BES console you see it immediately. It should show up within the ILMT console. By default, there's an import that happens. That import out of the box is once a day at around midnight, so it can take 24 hours to show. If you want to force that through, then I would say I normally wait around 10 to 15 minutes, and then I do what's called a manual import. Once you've done the manual import, you will actually then go ahead and actually see the data. Any more questions?
Yeah, hi Suhail, this is Raj here. I have one more question.
Hi, Raj. Yep.
When we install the ILMT first time, on a server, are we not supposed to see any confirmed classifications, like confirmed instances of any of the softwares?
No, no, you won't see any.
It.
No. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, go on. I just recently configured a new ILMT environment, and unlike previous version, I don't see any single instances which is confirmed by default automatically by any of the BES agents. It shows 0 confirmed, and I need to confirm everything manually. As you stated earlier, it may take 3 to 8 days, so if the environment is big, it might take more than that.
Yeah, and yes, you're right. I can't see any reason why it should automatically confirm those for you. Now, there may be some other ways that you can do it quicker. So if you've got, let's say, one of the things that you can do is you can put the part numbers in there. So, for example, if you don't put the part number for ILMT and you roll out the agents out there, then you will still need to go back and confirm it. What you can do is confirm it at the higher level. So in this screenshot, where it has Infosphere Business Glossary for Non-Production Environments 20, you can confirm it at that level. But you do have to confirm those manually still, and you do have to confirm everything.
Okay.
Yeah.
My assumption was that in the previous version, it used to confirm a few instances automatically and be sure 100%.
No. Okay. So what it did was that there was no in the previous version 7.5. What it did was it say, I've discovered these components, and this is where I think the products should actually be. It's very rare that that would go to 100%. They used to use percentages, so it would say 90% or 99%. I can't recall whether it always go to 100%, but in this version there is no percentage. It's either confirm or unconfirm, and you do have to go in and confirm those products. It is time consuming, and the more products you have, is it does take longer. But if you had instances where you had a product rolled out to 30, 40, 50 servers, then you can confirm it at a high level. I actually think it's also good practice to go back and actually check that what's been discovered is correct. I've seen so many examples where it will say that I've discovered a product or it's allocated it incorrectly. So it really is worth doing that. One of the things that we see quite often is that technical guys, when they do installations of IBM products, they will create, let's say, an install directory or a software image directory, and they just that image directory just stays there. Quite often it will actually find signature files in those. Now, it shouldn't do in reality, but we've seen it find and actually say, yes, you've got a product install, whereas in fact it's actually not a real product. All it is just an image. So I still strongly believe you should go back and actually verify that it is a true product that's installed. Sometimes people take backups of directories, copy the same directory again, and it will show multiple installs, whereas in fact it's actually just one install. So I think it's actually good practice to go back and verify everything together.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Okay, so the next question is, what is the best way of ensuring that the product you are confirming is actually deployed on the device? Okay, one of the things that I really like, and this is what will really help you in this new version. In the previous version, it was very difficult to actually work out where the signature file was being found, where it's been detected, what signature file it actually picked up on. But what you can do is for each product, so during the planning phase, what we tend to do is say, for each of the core products that you have, we say, who is the subject matter expert that actually understands the installation? Because only the person that really understands what's installed on those servers will know the reality of those. So what we tend to do is have a customer subject matter expert that can confirm those. But what helps you now is, in the new version, you can actually go to them and say, I've discovered product A, and this is where I've actually discovered. You can actually give him that data. That data is actually available in the ILMT report console. So you can run off a report very quickly and say, this component is found on this server, and it's found it in these locations. So then you can go back to them and actually say, is this correct? What is this? Is this a backup? Is this a software image? And is it truly this product as well? So that, to me, is really the best way of doing that. Is the data's there, is actually taking it back to the SME to actually confirm that. Okay, yeah, so with AS400, with the latest release, it is now supported, but there is still some manual work, and again, we can send you some details on that, but it is some manual work that needs more, whereas with all the other agents, it's completely automated. But at the moment, you have to run a standalone discovery on the AS400 agent. Once that discovery is done, then you do a manual import of that data. So it's not fully automated. It was just released, I think, sometime roughly a month or two ago, but it is now available. Any more questions, anyone? So the other thing I would encourage you to do is if you got any more questions, then don't hesitate to drop us a note. And secondly, what I'd also like to do is actually say, if there's a session that you want us to cover in more detail, like the classification piece, the installation piece, then please drop us a note. And if we've got several people that want to see that, then we can arrange another session. What we will also be offering, and there'll be a note that comes out regarding this, we're also offering a free, no obligation assessment for your site. So there'll be an email that comes out that will offer you a free assessment to say, this is where you are today and this is where you need to get to, and discuss some of the steps that you can take. Yeah, the software classification, yes, that is it is, I would say it's probably the hardest piece. And just a quick comment on that, that is the reason why the majority of ILMT implementations fail, because to actually classify a product correctly, you have to understand IBM licensing in detail. You also have to know where to go away and get the data. So quite often we see the implementation of ILMT handed over to technical staff, whereas they may be able to get it installed and working. What they're not familiar with is how the software licensing works. So if a product's been discovered, it really is in-depth knowledge that you need. And this is one of the reasons why we've been so successful, because within our organization we've got in the excess of 20-25 years of licensing IBM products. And yes, that is to me the actual key. Okay, so the next question is, how simple, difficult are the spreadsheets? It really isn't difficult at all. It's something that you just have to, again, we can send you the template, and it's something that you will just have to fill in on a monthly basis and just apply a signature. Okay, so that's dot on 3 o'clock. I hope you enjoyed the session. If you've got any feedback, then please feel free to send us. There will be a note that will be coming out after this with the presentation attached. And as I said, if you've got any more questions, then don't hesitate to contact us. Thank you, and goodbye.
Thanks.
Thanks.